Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving in something pretty fundamental, this idea of divine provision.
Yeah, how we see it, how we respond to it. We've got some really interesting sources lined up.
Exactly. We're looking at how people, recognize God's care in their daily lives. And it's not just theory. We're talking historical accounts, practical stuff, things relevant right now.
Right. So if you're maybe navigating a career thing, or just looking for deeper meaning, or honestly just curious about faith and real life colliding,
Yeah.
this should give you some useful perspectives.
Our mission here is really to pull out the key ideas, the actionable bits from all this material we've gathered, kind of give you the tools to see and, well, engage with this idea of provision yourself.
And the range of sources is great. We've got big biblical stories, Abraham, Manna, Elijah, the early church, but then also these incredible missionary stories. William Carey, Hudson Taylor, Amy Carmichael, the Moravians.
Oh, yeah.
And even thinking about how these ideas might play out today, like for, say, startup founders or freelancers.
Okay, so where do we start? How do we even begin to see this provision happening?
Well, a big theme that comes up right away is this shift in perspective. Moving away from just seeing everything as coincidence.
Right. Training ourselves to look for or at least be open to the possibility of something more, like divine action in just everyday stuff.
Exactly. Like, think about those times you got help out of the blue. Maybe a perfectly timed phone call or finding something you desperately needed.
Yeah, the sources mention things like a stranded driver finding a mechanic, seemingly randomly. Or the classic example, the manna in the desert food just appearing every day.
These aren't just written off as lucky breaks in these accounts. Some traditions talk about Melchizedek moments, unexpected provision meeting faith right at the point of need.
It makes you think. These moments, big or small, they seem to invite us to pay more attention, doesn't it?
Yeah, like tuning into a specific radio frequency, becoming more aware, more sensitive to how God might be working behind the scenes.
And that leads into what one source calls the economy of provision, which isn't really about money, is it?
Not in the usual sense, no. It's more about a pattern. We see this cycle, offering what little you have, giving thanks for it, then there's a kind of breaking or multiplying, and finally distribution.
The feeding of the 5,000 is the textbook case, right? Jesus starts with almost nothing, gives thanks, breaks it, and suddenly there's enough for everyone.
Precisely. It suggests the way God often works, starting with our limited offerings. And tied to this is another key idea, expectation.
But expectation not like demanding something specific.
No, not like that. It's more about cultivating an open heart, a posture of belief, even when things look bleak. Like Abraham believing God's promise against all odds.
It's like actively watching for the sunrise, even when it's still pitch black.
Right. And that kind of active watching, that disciplined expectation, it actually sharpens our spiritual senses, makes us more likely to recognize provision when it comes.
And crucially, there's the element of remembering past provisions too, isn't there? Several sources really stress that.
Absolutely. Looking back at when God did provide, documenting it, sharing it, it builds this sort of storehouse of faith, as one writer put it, something to draw on later.
And it's not just for ourselves, there's this invitation aspect too.
Definitely. The provision isn't meant to be hoarded. Look at the early church, selling possessions, sharing everything. It's about distributing the overflow, inviting others to the table, just like with the 5,000.
Which really makes me think about that specific story of the manna, the echo of manna. That seems like such a core lesson.
Oh, it is. The sources frame it as a masterclass in divine teaching. You have the Israelites, just freed from slavery, stuck in a desert, totally dependent.
And God's provision isn't a one-off rescue package. It's daily, consistent.
That daily rhythm is key. Manna appears with the dew each morning. They're told to gather only enough for that day, except before the Sabbath.
Right, the double portion then.
And you couldn't hoard it. It would spoil. It forces this reliance on the next day's provision.
So it teaches dependence, not self-sufficiency, and expectation they had to actively look each morning. And obedience because of the rules about gathering and not hoarding.
Exactly. And that no hoarding rule really fostered community, didn't it? You had to trust.
And the connection made to the Eucharist or communion is really striking too, that same pattern. Offer, bless, share.
It is. Plus, the Sabbath being built into that rhythm, it underscores that our worth isn't just about what we produce, it's about rest, relationship with God.
You can see echoes today, maybe, like teams celebrating small daily wins, their daily manna, or the importance of genuine rest, a modern Sabbath.
Definitely. Even simple practices like daily reflection or gratitude journals could be seen as tapping into that ancient rhythm.
Okay, but what about when provision looks, well, weird? The sources talk about ravens, oil, a fish's belly. Those aren't exactly standard delivery system.
No, they're not. And that's the point, isn't it? God isn't limited by our neat little boxes of how things are supposed to work.
Elijah fed by ravens, the widow's oil never running out, Jonah getting a very unconventional taxi service from a fish.
It screams creativity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
God's resources are boundless. But notice, often there's an element of partnership.
How so?
Well, often these miracles happen after someone takes a step of faith, acts on the little they do have, or obeys a seemingly strange instruction. The widow had to use her last bit of flour and oil first.
Ah, right. There's often an act of obedience involved, even when it seems illogical.
And again, community often pops up. The widow shared, the manna was for everyone, God's supply often flows through and builds community.
And the power of telling these stories. Israel passed these down for generations. It built their collective faith.
Totally. And maybe for us, sharing our own manna moments, those times we saw unexpected help, could do the same thing in our families, our workplaces, our communities, build that culture of expecting good things.
Which leads perfectly into Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. That name itself is so powerful.
It comes right out of that intense story with Abraham and Isaac on the mountain, doesn't it? The ultimate test of trust.
Yeah, Abraham's obedience, his trust, right up to the last second. And then God provides the ram. Such a stark image.
It really shifts the focus from "I've got this" to "He will provide." And the sources suggest that that shift is where true freedom lies, not in self-sufficiency, but in trusting God's supply.
And it highlights God's creativity again. When the main road seems blocked, he opens these unexpected side doors.
Exactly. And often, as we keep seeing, community is the channel. Blessings flowing through these networks of people caring for each other.
So zooming out, recognizing God as provider fundamentally changes how we see everything, doesn't it? What looked random might actually be intentional.
It opens up that possibility. And the sources encourage practical steps, like keeping a provision journal, actually writing down instances of help.
Or taking those faith step experiments, as one source calls them, acting on a nudge, trusting the outcome.
And this whole idea of an unseen current of provision really lights up when you look at mission history. The pattern is so clear. God calls, God provides.
William Carey is a prime example, facing huge hurdles going to India.
Incredible obstacle.
And he kept detailed notes, not just finances, but every little bit of help, every unexpected gift.
And it wasn't just for his records. He shared these Providence Snapshots, as he called them. They became testimonies, fuel for the mission.
It inspired people, brought in support, volunteers.
Exactly. It shows that pattern. God initiates, people act as channels, and remembering and sharing fuels momentum. Even tiny gifts add up.
And it wasn't just Carey. The sources mention Hudson Taylor in China, relying on prayer and unexpected funds. Amy Carmichael in India, chronicling small graces.
David Livingstone, the Moravians. Their journals are full of these provision snapshots. They saw God's personal care in the midst of immense challenges.
So the key themes keep recurring. God taking the first step, his personal involvement, the crucial role of recording and remembering, and testimony driving things forward.
Yeah. And Amy Carmichael's story adds another layer, finding peace, God's presence, as a form of provision, even amid persecution. Sometimes the provision isn't material, it's spiritual strength or unexpected kindness from others.
Like Carey's meticulous records of small donations fueling a global movement. It's amazing.
And the Moravians? Their whole community was built on this radical dependence. They expected timely provision, and their records show it happened in uncanny ways.
It sounds like they really lived it out corporately.
They did. Their shared resources, their deep community life, it all flowed from this trust. And their detailed journals weren't just history. They were active testimonies, strengthening their own faith and inspiring others.
So it really hammers home the point. Provision isn't just about getting our needs met. It's essential for the bigger picture, for whatever mission or purpose we feel called to.
Absolutely. From Abraham getting the call and the supplies, to the manna enabling Israel's journey, to the Great Commission followed by Pentecost power, provision and purpose are linked.
And in our time, how does that look? The sources mention things like testimony walls or grace reports in meetings.
Yeah, practical ways to build that corporate faith.
Yeah.
Sharing stories openly, maybe even exploring models of shared resources like a modern common treasury in some contexts.
And central to all this is remembering. Actively remembering God's faithfulness seems crucial for keeping faith alive long term.
It really is. Think about ancient Israel altars, festivals. They were all about embedding memory. Remember what God did here.
It's not just nostalgia, is it? There's something powerful, maybe even neurologically, about recalling positive past experiences. It shapes our outlook.
Totally.
Right.
It builds resilience and hope. So the sources push us towards practical ways to create and share our own provision snapshots.
And these personal stories, these chronicles, they become more than just diary entries. They turn into living testimonies.
Exactly. They make faith tangible for others. They're not abstract doctrines. They're real-life examples. They act like invitations.
Invitations to consider a different way of looking at life.
Yeah. There's a strong biblical history of testimony being a powerful missional tool. Sharing your story can open doors.
The sources even give a kind of blueprint for a good provision snapshot, don't they?
They do, like 5 key elements.
Yeah.
What was the need or situation? What was the prayer or hope? What exactly was the provision? When did you recognize it as provision? And what was your response? Gratitude. Action.
Being specific, capturing the feeling of it, that seems important.
Definitely. It's the details and the heart echo that make a story connect. A simple, authentic story can really glorify God, build up others' faith, and just strengthen the bonds in a community.
Okay, but what about the potential downsides? How do we share these stories without, making it about us?
That's a really important caution. The focus has to stay on God's faithfulness, not our own cleverness or virtue. Humility is key.
And being accurate, honest about what happened.
Absolutely. And then living in a way that reflects the story, letting that experience of provision shape how we live and give. The sources offer good tips on sharing with integrity.
So it sounds like actively looking for these moments, becoming a provision spotter, and then sharing those snapshots, it can create real momentum.
Yeah, it builds personal faith, inspires others, and fosters this culture of expectancy and gratitude. It can change the atmosphere in a family, a team, a church.
The sources even include some reflection questions for people, leaders especially, and practical exercises to help actually do this.
Right, to really embed these ideas.
So to kind of wrap things up, we've journeyed through this whole concept of divine provision. We've seen the importance of shifting our view, recognizing God's hand in big things and small things.
And cultivating that expectancy, that attentive heart, plus the crucial role of gratitude, remembering, recording, and then sharing those stories, those testimonies.
These seem to be the vital threads for engaging with God's care in a really active way.
Absolutely. It's about seeing life through a different lens.
So here's something to chew on as you leave this deep dive. How could actively looking for and sharing your own provision snapshots change things? Not just for your own faith journey, but how might it ripple out? How could it help others around you see that unseen current of grace in their lives?
Yeah, what small step could you take today? Maybe just noticing one thing. Or perhaps sharing one small story with someone. It could spark something surprising.
What small act of noticing or sharing will you commit to today? Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.